In 1980, the police were called to an apartment in Finland after a woman had accidentally died in her own home. When the police came to the scene, they discovered a 36-year-old woman dead, half naked, and wrapped inside of a carpet. With her in the apartment was her husband, Ismo Junni, who opened the door to the police and directed them to her body. Little did they know that this was one of Finland's few serial killers, also known as the Tooth Killer. So hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Elin and on this channel I cover true crime cases that have occurred in the Nordic countries. The content warnings for this case are domestic violence, sexual abuse, arson, and I will also mention the death of a dog, so if that's something that you don't want to watch, then I suggest you click out of this video right now. With that being said, now let's get into the case that happened in Finland. Ismo and Kaija Junni lived in an apartment in a part of Helsinki called Kontula along with their 3 children. At first, the family lived a pretty good family life. Ismo was working for a roof repair company and the children were taken care of. But later, this household became very unstable as Ismo and Kaija started drinking a lot of alcohol, and Kontula was during this time an area that was connected to a lot of crimes, drugs, and violence. In August of 1980, the police were called to Kaija's and Ismo's apartment. This was after Kaija had accidentally died in their home, and the man who opened the door to the police was her own husband, Ismo Junni. He did not really say anything and just pointed to the walk-in closet where the police found 36-year-old Kaija's half-naked body. Her body was partially wrapped up in a carpet, she had injuries to her head, and she was actually missing a tooth. Due to domestic violence being common in Kontula at that time, the police were suspicious towards Ismo, but they did not really have any evidence to arrest him. The crime scene and evidence did also match an accidental death, according to the police, and I'm not really sure how being wrapped up in a carpet can seem accidental, but anyway. Kaija and Ismo's children were all under 15 years old and they did not really say much during questioning. Basically, they said that in the morning they had seen their mother gasping for air on the bathroom floor, and this was not really anything unusual in the turbulent household. They then left for school, and when they came back, they found out that their mother was dead. Ismo himself described their relationship as not being very happy as the time they spent together was mostly fights or drinking. Neighbors were also aware of their turbulent marriage as they often heard these arguments and had even heard Ismo threatening to kill Kaija many times. Ismo claimed that Kaija had been drinking and fell in the bathroom and this caused her to die. Kaija's autopsy showed that Kaija had been knocked out before her death and also gotten bruises over her body. There was also water found inside of Kaija's lungs, which might have played a role in her death. Due to the blow to her head, this had caused extensive intracranial hemorrhage, which is a bleeding inside of her brain. So Ismo was arrested after this, but he claimed that he was innocent, and the case eventually went cold as there was no more evidence and Kaija's death was ruled an accident. After Kaija's death, the couple's children ended up in the care of Ismo's parents. The grandparents actually urged the children to keep quiet about the incident to leave the adults' troubles off their shoulders. In 1990, a young man called the emergency services and asked them to reopen the case of Kaija Junni. This was actually Kaija and Ismo's oldest son, who was around 30 years old at this point in time, and he has not been named in the media, so I'm not gonna name him in this video. He explained that the case had not been well investigated and that he did not only suspect his father in his mother's death, he had seen the murder happen. He told them that his parents had been fighting and Kaija then went to hide under a bed when he saw his father, Ismo, kick her in the head until she died. He was at this point around 15 years old and the 2 younger children had been sleeping. So the investigators now went through the 10-year-old files and they realized that nothing that this boy had just told them was in any of these papers. There was also no explanation for Kaija's missing tooth, and basically the material raised more questions than answers. So the case was reopened and Ismo was taken in for questioning. At first he told them the same story, that they had been drinking and Kaija ended up falling in the bathroom and hitting her head, but he then suddenly decided to confess. He then told them that an argument broke out since he did not like that Kaija was drinking straight from the bottle, and this turned into a physical fight. Neighbors had also heard the couple fight as Kaija was hit, kicked, and thrown towards furniture. She then injured her head on the sink before Ismo carried her to the bathroom. He filled their tub with hot water, and while Kaija was still alive, he put her head under water. He then decided to drag her body to the wardrobe to have sexual intercourse with her. But this did not work, so he decided to rape her with a plunger, and this was laying next to her body in the crime scene photos. When he was done, he took a pliers and dragged out one of her teeth that he then kept inside of his wallet as a trophy. According to himself, he dragged the tooth out to check if she was playing dead or if she was still alive, and she actually was still alive, but she was unresponsive. When she did not react, Isma assumed that she was dead and went to the neighbors, who called the police. When the police arrived, there was nothing that they could do as Kaija was already gone. So Isma was now a suspect in Kaija's murder, and the police pretty much knew that he was guilty. But they still wanted to gather more evidence against him, so they decided to question a couple close to Isma and Kaija, who were both their neighbors but also their friends. But when the police got to their home, they got the news that the man of the house, Matti Haapanen, and his dog had died in a fire of their summer cabin in 1986. Matti's wife Ayla was a sharp and precise woman, and she told investigators that her husband's death was suspicious and kinda bothered her. This was mostly due to Ismo's behavior afterwards, but also Ismo and Matti's relationship before his death. Matti's wife stated that Ismo and Matti met during one of their drinking trips and they became friends, so their families were often hanging out together. Matti and his wife had a baby girl who died in blood poisoning, and this led Matti into drinking to drown his sorrows. Matti's wife did not accept alcohol in their home, so Matti started spending a lot of time at Ismo's place, and I'm talking even weeks and months at a time. And remember that Ismo had a wife, Kaija, so this led Kaija into started drinking to handle two drunk men around all the time. Matti and Ismo's relationship was turbulent, and when drinking they sometimes got into arguments, but Matti and Kaija, so Ismo's wife, actually got along very well. And this made Ismo jealous as hell, as he thought that Kaija was sleeping with other men, including Matti, especially since Kaija sometimes stayed up with the men after Ismo went to sleep. And this is also why Ismo used to abuse Kaija due to his jealousy. Matti then decided to stay sober and stop drinking for a while, and Ismo also tried this, but he failed. Matti's wife described Ismo's life as a huge failure basically, as he always started things but never finished it. She also said that she had been scared of Ismo killing Kaija for a while before her death, and one day Ismo had just walked into their home all clean with his hair combed and calmly stated, "Kaija is dead." After Kaija's death, Ismo actually received insurance money that he used to buy alcohol, so Matti and his wife started to get a bit suspicious and wondered if he had something to do with Kaija's death. Ismo eventually confessed to killing Kaija, but Matti and his wife did not take this information to the police since Matti did not want this. Matti also used to make fun of Ismo for the murder, and Ismo in return would always make comments such as, "We will see what will happen to you." When Ayla sometimes got frustrated at Matti's behavior, Ismo would tell her, "Don't worry, things will soon get easier for you." After Matti's death, Ismo had told Matti's wife that he had been present during the fire, which also made no sense, and why would he not have helped him if he was there? When the police started looking more into this, they found even more strange incidents connected to Ismo. In that part of Helsinki, there were a lot of summer houses and people often spent their summer vacations there. For some reason, there had been many fires around that exact area in the 1980s, and in these both Matti and three others had died. Ismo's parents had also owned a summer cabin in this area, so it was a familiar area for him, and he spent a lot of his childhood there. So the police opened the investigation regarding Matti Haapanen's death and decided to question Ismo about it. He told them that he had seen Matti at the day of the fire and that he was there when the cabin caught on fire. His story kept on changing, which is not a good sign, by the way, until he finally confessed that he burned down his friend's summer cottage and his friend alive. Ismo told investigators that they had been drinking together in the summer cabin that evening, which was not anything unusual. They ended up getting into an argument, and Ismo could not remember what it was about but claimed that it was something silly. Ismo then decided to hit Matti in the head with a vase, so his teeth actually broke, and I think he either fell unconscious from this or at least he was fighting to stay alive. One of Matti's teeth was sticking out from his upper lip, and Ismo just grabbed this and put it in his pocket in the same place that he kept his wife's tooth. During the fight, a candle had fallen, and Ismo decided that he was not gonna try to put this fire out, but instead help spreading it. He then closed the door behind him and left all satisfied while his friend was laying helpless on the bed. Left inside the cabin was also unfortunately Matti and Eila's dog, who had been hiding under the bed when the men had been fighting. Ismo then sat down close by to watch as his friend and the dog burned inside of the cabin that he set on fire. The investigators were actually unsure if Ismo was speaking the truth, so they decided to check the evidence from that day, and it was all adding up with Ismo's version of events. Ismo also told them small details such as the fabric inside of the cabin. Matti had been alive when the fire started, as his lungs showed signs of smoke inhalation. Ismo also claimed that when he walked out of the cabin, Matti called for him in agony. The police now suspected that Ismo might have caused more of the fires, and they also believed that they were not just dealing with an arsonist, they were dealing with a serial killer. The police now started looking into a case that happened only a couple of months before Matti's murder. This was a case of two men dying in a fire, and the case was very similar to Matti's case. So the police decided to straight up ask Ismo about this, and he straight away confessed that he caused this fire as well. Ismo had met the two men, Seppo and Juha, when they were fishing. They started drinking together and eventually ended up drinking in one of their cabins. In Ismo's own words, things eventually took a turn for the worse as an argument escalated into a fight. Ismo has stated that he intentionally caused this argument and was eventually kicked out of the cabin. He then went to a stone wall and sat there for a while, and he just got more and more angry. So he eventually returned to the cabin, and at this point Seppo and Juha were already sleeping. They did not wake up when Ismo sneaked into the cabin, and he just took a lit candle and dropped it between the men. He then just walked out and poured lamp oil under the cabin, and after a few minutes the cabin was up in flames. At some point during all of this, Seppo and Juha actually woke up in flames, but Ismo did not let them out of the cabin. Ismo again decided to watch from a distance as the cabin with the men inside burned to the ground. The police again requested more details, unsure if Ismo was telling the truth, and he told them that he thought the younger man was skinny and would not cause any trouble in a fight, while the older one had big fists and strong arms. So this pretty much reveals that he was planning on killing them, and it was not just some spontaneous argument that broke out due to alcohol. Which was also my first thought, that he was probably lying about this whole scenario, and in reality he just wanted to kill people. Because what are the odds of him getting into arguments with pretty much everyone that he met? I think this was just his way of making it seem like manslaughter and not murder, or maybe he just wanted to play with the police. Investigators now decided to open up another case that happened in 1988 when a well-known man in the area called Pauli had died in a cabin fire. He was actually living in this cabin, and he used to bike around the area on his bicycle. Ismo straight away told them that yes, I have something to do with it. He told them that he had been in the store buying alcohol when he intentionally stepped on a man's toes to get his attention. This was Pauli, and Ismo knew that he lived in that specific area, so they became friends and ended up drinking in Pauli's cabin. The story from this point forward is basically the exact same storyline as in the other two cabin fires. They were drinking and having fun until an argument broke out. Ismo was then thrown out of the cabin, and instead of just going home, he decided to murder Pauli in the exact same way as the other fires. So this was now an investigation to the murder of 5 people, and the case went to trial. Ismo at first did not have anything to say during the trial, but he last minute took back his confession to Pauli's murder. He now claimed that he was being treated for alcoholism in a facility during the time of the murder and could not have committed it. So this meant that the case had to be investigated more, and the police checked with the facility if Ismo had been there that night, but they claimed that they had no way of telling if he was for sure present there at the time of the murder, as the people there could just come and go how they wanted. He also knew a lot of details about Pauli's cabin, so in the end there was no question about it. In February of 1992, the court reached their verdict and Ismo Junni was found guilty of the murder of Seppo, Juha, Matti and Pauli. When it came to Kaja's death, he was found guilty of manslaughter, but the Court of Appeal later changed this verdict to aggravated assault and negligent homicide. Ismo was also found guilty of arson and destruction of property, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. In Finland, life in prison never really means life in prison though, and the sentence is usually around 12 to 14 years. This is because after 12 years, the court will go through the case and decide if the person should be released. But Ismo only served 3 years before dying at the age of 51 due to complications from heart surgery. Ismo's motives for the crimes are still unknown, and unfortunately they will never be answered. But investigators have speculated that this was Ismo's way of showing power and superiority. Matti's wife has stated that Ismo started threatening people regularly after Kaja's death and wanted revenge on anyone who did him wrong. She had tried to tell investigators that she believed Ismo was behind the murder of her husband, but they just believed that it was an accident. Ismo was also super jealous of what other people had and easily became violent. And this kinda made me think that maybe Ismo was jealous of the people who had a cabin in that exact area, since his family used to have a cabin in the area that was later sold. So basically he was now an outsider in that community, but he did not want to be, as he had been super angry when his parents sold the cabin since he wanted it himself. So maybe this was some kind of jealous revenge because they lived the life that he wanted to live and had something that he wanted to have. A mental evaluation showed that he held a grudge even after small incidents, for example, if a person said something wrong to him. He would then remember this and wait for the perfect moment to get revenge. This made me believe that maybe the murder of Matti was his way of getting revenge, since Matti was making fun of him and he also knew about Kaja's murder. According to investigators, Ismo was jealous of Matti because his wife Eila looked good and took care of the household while his wife was an alcoholic. Ismo did not show any remorse for his actions, but he was also proud of his acts as he took teeth from his victims and was watching the fires. Unfortunately, not much is known about Ismo's childhood, so it's hard to say if there was any red flags or something traumatic happening in his upbringing. According to investigators, Ismo had very good social skills, and this basically became his deadliest weapon as he was able to get close to people, even strangers. This was actually the largest series of murders in Finland's independent history, in which a total of 5 people had lost their lives. Ismo Junni is not officially classified as a serial killer, but according to the definition of a serial killer, he does fit the criteria. I mean, he did have a certain way of killing his victims. They were all his friends or people that he befriended, and he committed them around the same time and in the same area. So he can therefore be called a serial killer, but in Finland he has mostly been called the tooth killer. Something interesting is that when Ismo was picked up from his home in Kontula for interrogations in early 1991, a piece of denture was found in the apartment. The owner to this has never been found, and it did not belong to Ismo himself or any of his victims or acquaintances. So the question to this day remains, could Ismo Junni possibly have had more victims? But that's all that I have for this case, and to me it's just so crazy that this case was solved by a phone call from his son. I mean, if his son would have never called, then one of Finland's worst serial killers would have probably never been caught. The police literally thought that all of these fires were accidents, even if they were all happening around the same time and in a very suspicious manner, so who knows how long he would have been able to continue if he would not have been caught. I personally believe that there could have been many more victims, but I also think that we will never get answers to that question. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you in my next case. Goodbye everyone.